Jesus smuggling is, you're going to follow all the way. Yes, yes. And then the worry is that when you get to the bit that you're not so good on, that's when they're going to smuggle in Jesus.
Yeah, yeah.
My suspicion is that you have a reservation about some of what Jordan is saying on substructures, on stories, and much more, because you're worried that at some point, either on this stage or off it, at some point when you're not looking,
yes, or when I am looking,
he's going to Jesus smuggle you.
Yeah, that's a.
Well, is that fair?
Yeah. I was thinking maybe I'd just carry him in on a cross.
Yeah, right. Well, that is an all too apt analogy, because it is what worries me, and it's more subtle than that, because it's not to think that you're consciously doing it is a different claim. Like I don't think there's anything insincere about your argument for the importance of religion, but it's also possible. We've all met the people who we believe are making insincere arguments and are really they're consciously putting the rabbit in the hat and then pretending to be surprised when it pops out, right? Mm-hmm. And the analogy to magic is actually interesting here, because we over dinner were talking about the difference between real and fake art, and we were talking about this paradox that the art seems to be incredibly valuable, and yet the value isn't located in the object itself, or can't be obviously located there, because a forgery that is materially the exact copy of some masterpiece is essentially worthless, and the real masterpiece, even if it suffered some damage, would be incredibly valuable. And so where is the value to be located? But what worries me about your enterprise, Jordan, and the way in which you seem to be linking our rational project and our scientific project with religion is right here. There's a difference between, and magic is a decent analogy, there's a difference between, like, paradoxically, real magic is fake magic, and fake magic is real magic. The only real magic in the world produced by magicians is the fake magic, where the magician, like someone like Darren Brown, will tell you, actually, no, I can't read minds, and I did put the rabbit in the hat, and this is fake, but the surprise is that even knowing it's fake, you can't understand how this effect is being achieved. Whereas the fake magicians are the ones who are pretending to be real, who are hiding, who are not acknowledging the mechanics, the real mechanics behind what is in fact effective. You know, the illusion that the rabbit pops out of the hat. And what I worry with some of the way in which you discuss the power of story, the power of metaphor, and the religious anchoring there, is that the leverage and the utility can be had even while acknowledging the real mechanics of it. You know, the fakeness of the magic, right? And you seem to suspect that it can't, that takes all of the wind out of the sails.
I'm not so sure what of it's fake and what of it isn't. Well, so I would say that I do consciously participate in the process that you described. But you see, I would also make the case, and this is certainly one of the things that we've been discussing, that you do it unconsciously. And let me make the case for that for a minute, because I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'd like to see your response. So when I really read The Moral Landscape a lot, and I thought about it a lot, you know, and so this is what it looks like to me. So you make the proposition that we have to breach the gap between facts and values, because otherwise our values are left hanging unmoored, and that certainly brings about the danger of nihilism, but also a potential danger of swing to totalitarianism, something we agree about. I truly do believe that. Right. And then you perform an operation, a conceptual operation, and you say, surely we can all agree that, and then you outline a story about this woman who lives in this horrible country, who's basically just being starved and disease-ridden and tortured her whole life and having just a hell of a time of it, to put it in a phrase. Mm-hmm. And then you say, well, surely we can all agree that that's not good. And then you contrast that with, at least in principle, the sort of life that we would all like to have if we could choose the life that we have. and then you say, well, we could start with the proposition that we should move away from this terrible, hellish circumstance, and we should move towards this more ideal perspective. And you say, if we could only agree on that, then. And so,
right.
and so, like, so far so good. But there's a couple of things that go along with that are quite interesting. And so the first is that actually what you're claiming is that the highest moral good isn't existing in that better space. The highest moral good is acting in the manner that moves us from the hellish domain to the desirable domain. It seems to me to be implicit in your argument. So there's a pattern of behavior that constitutes the ethic.
Well, I would say that existing in that better space is good enough as well. So, I mean, there's the question of what it takes to move from where you are to someplace better, and then there's just the someplace that's better.
There's both of those. Well, but perhaps we could say, look, what's the ultimate hell? It might be existing in the hell that you described, but it also might be, this is something worse, I think. I think that participating in the process that brings about that hell is actually a hell that's even deeper than the hell. So it's an analogous argument. There's the state of being in a good state, but there's also the state of being that brings you to that good state, and then there's the state of being that's that's a terrible state, and the process that brings you to that terrible state. And one of the things that I've learned from the archetypal and religious texts that I've studied, as well as the philosophical texts, is that the process that transforms society into something approximating hell is a lower hell. Now, the reason...
Well, let me just close the loop on that, because I'm pretty sure I disagree. One, you can imagine two counterexamples. One is you can imagine a sadistic being, you might even call him God, who would create a circumstance of hell and populate it with innocent souls, right? Now that's, presumably, that action, it need not be attended by a lot of suffering. Or you could imagine some...
No, but it's still wrong.
Oh, still totally
it's still wrong.
Yes.
No,
yes.
You could even imagine someone who enjoys generating hell.
Yes, it could be a source of
but that would even be
perversion.
more wrong than not enjoying it.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so we want to separate out two things. We want to separate out these states of being and the process that brings them into being. And I do believe you do that in your work, because basically what you suggest is that the appropriate way to act ethically is to act in a manner that moves us away from hell and moves us towards a desirable state. Now, the thing is that as far as I'm concerned, there's a couple of things about that. The first thing is that I wouldn't say that that mode of acting is a fact. I would say it's a personality. And that what you're suggesting is that people embody the personality that moves society away from hell towards heaven, for lack of a better term. And the reason I make that argument is because I think that you recapitulate the essential Christian message precisely by doing that, because symbolically speaking, at least as far as I can understand, stripped of its of its metaphysical context, let's say, that the purpose of positing the vision of the ideal human being, which, independent of the metaphysical context, it's certainly what the symbol of Christ represents, is the mode of being that moves us most effectively from something approximating hell to something approximating heaven. And then part of that message is, and this is also something that's dead along the lines of what you're arguing, is that the best way to embody that is actually to live in truth. I mean, so because I would say that the fundamental Christian ethic, metaphysics accepted once again, is to act in love, which is to assume that being is acceptable and can be perfected, and to pursue that with truth, and that you should embody that. And then I would say that the purpose of the representation, we could call them metafictions or archetypal representations, is to show that in embodied format so that it can be imitated, rather than to transform it into something that's diluted in some sense to an abstract rationality. Because I don't think the abstract rationality in itself has enough flesh on it, so to speak, which is partly why in the Christian ethic there's an emphasis that the word, which is something roughly akin to rationality, has to be made flesh. It has to be enacted.
But is the flesh made of dogmatism and superstition and otherworldliness? Is that part of what gives it its shape and necessity? I think traditionally, historically, it has been, and that's been the problem with religion. If you denude it of everything that is unjustifiable in the light of 21st century science and rationality, I think what you have to get down to is something quite a bit more universal and less provincial